Will NBN's new fibre promises lead to faster broadband?
And will that faster future get smarter with newer network tech behind the scenes?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News. Each week we chat with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined as usual by Adam Turner. Adam, just to jump back to a story we discussed last week, Telstra announced its 5G home broadband plans to combat Optus's existing ones. And this week, Vodafone's come to the party with cheap 4G home broadband plans. Is that a masterstroke, or is Vodafone just ignoring the existence of 5G?
Oh, look, mate, if you can't beat them on quality, then you've got to beat them on quantity. I think that's what it comes down to. Look, it's only 4G, but you can have as much as you bloody want for $50 a month. I reckon that'll fly with some people.
Now, we bring up networks because this week's show is all about them, which is why I laid a careful trail of snacks and gin along a bike path near the virtual Vertical Hold studios in order to capture this week's guest. There was really only one tech journo we were likely to get with that particular trap. From the Register, the fastest tech journo on two wheels, Register APAC editor Simon Sharwood. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. That's the nicest intro I've ever had.
Simon's here to talk smarter networks with us, not just faster ones. We'll get to that directly.
But first, we caught up with Britt, Managing Director of our podcast sponsor, Aussie Broadband, to talk about the future of the NBN. Phil, welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much, guys.
Now, we've seen recently the NBN announce another 200,000 homes and businesses are becoming eligible for fibre upgrades. Is this something to get excited about? What does this tell us about the future direction of the NBN?
Look, I think it is a positive thing. It's good to see that NBN's looking at, swapping out some of that fibre to node technology and so on. It's interesting that they're pitching it at some of the fibre to the curb people when they've probably already got pretty good connections. But no, I think overall anything that gets more fibre into the NBN diet is a good thing. So.
And it says that it's 200,000 are eligible, but from what we're seeing, it's not necessarily a high number of people who actually get a crack at that.
Yeah, look, it's pretty selective at the moment. It's sort of being done as a trial initially to, get the kinks out of the system. Whenever NBN brings new stuff in, there's always a few kinks. So I think that's positive that they're doing that, and then hopefully it'll become a lot wider after that.
So for a lot of consumers, they sometimes muddle that line between my ISP, so in your case, Aussie Broadband, obviously, and NBN Co. For these fibre upgrades, is that something where a consumer should approach Aussie Broadband, or is that something where a consumer has to wait for NBN Co. to say, hey, yeah, better fibre is coming? How does that work?
So they can do it through participating service providers, and it's being run as a trial at the moment. Aussie's coming on board in the new year for this sort of thing. We've decided to sort of hold back a little, let some of those kinks get out of the system, and then, so they do go through their preferred RSP to do it.
More generally, what kind of demand have you seen for customers from not just faster speeds, but also upgrading their connection technologies?
Look, there's always a lot of people interested in it, in the upgrades. Some are prepared to pay the fees, sort of thing, to do it. Others are not. We have seen a lot of demand for above 100 meg services. So when the Focus on Fast campaigns ran through over the last 6 months, there were significant numbers of people voluntarily moved into the 250 into the 1 gig type services. And then we also uplifted about 52,000 customers into those higher tiers. As a bit of a try it at no cost kind of thing that we were doing to customers who'd been there for a while with us.
Now, that's a lot. There would have been a time when people would have said, oh, nobody needs those kind of speeds, or that would be very rare. Are you surprised at the numbers of people who are interested in those speed upgrades?
Look, I think a lot of people, it's about, okay, I can get those speeds and I'm happy to pay for them. I might not actually need them, or I might not, or I think I need them, but they're happy to go down that. So if they do, it's sitting there. I think the work from home environment as well has changed things considerably in terms of what people need, the number of people using the connection at the same time, the number of devices being used, and all of those factors are playing into people's buying decisions these days.
Yeah, I mean, this is totally personally anecdotal, but my own 250 service really got a workout when I had 3 school students doing remote learning, 1 school teacher doing remote teaching, and I'm trying to run my own business at the same time. That's when you definitely feel that need for speed, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where a lot of people really needed it was actually in the upstream direction. And so having that sort of 25 meg upload, we still feel is a bit restrictive. It's a bit of a product construct decision NBN's made. And so giving a bit more bandwidth in the upstream direction, I think would be actually far more valuable to households than necessarily 250 in the down direction.
Now, that's interesting because that leads into something else that I wanted to ask you about. Some retailers have been copying a bit of flack recently because they've been doing away with their 140 plans and moving people onto 120 plans. Now, pretty sure Aussie Broadband still gives you the choice. You can go for 120 or 140. What are the factors that are without having to name names, but what are the factors that are forcing some retailers to make those decisions?
Look, at the wholesale level, the 140 plan is $7 plus GST more expensive than the 120 plan. And so a lot of providers, they want to advertise a lower headline price for their 100 meg service. And so that's why we believe they've dropped the 140 option. We think customers should get a choice, so we offer both plans. We flagship and sort of hero the 120 in our marketing, but the 140 is there for people who want that extra upload bandwidth.
But there's no sort of technical challenge or other reason why any ISP shouldn't be able to offer it. They've made a business decision that they want to only offer 120.
Absolutely. It's just purely business decision.
Yep.
And that ties into, unless I'm very much mistaken, the way NBN provisions that difference between consumer and business plans. Because if you're on a business service, you can get, in fact, much higher upload rates if that's important to you.
Yeah, correct. And I think it's all about NBN trying to raise their ARPUs, and so where they can get a bit more revenue through those higher upload speeds, then that's their way of achieving it.
And what kind of split are you seeing between customers who want the 140 and are prepared to pay a bit extra for it, opposed to those who are happy to go with 120?
Look, the majority still go with 120, but we're probably seeing out of our 100 meg tier, and this is just off the top of my head, I think probably about 20% of our 100 meg cohort take the 140 versus the 120.
Yeah. And so we're talking about fibre upgrades, but then at the other end, of course, we've got your people out there on fixed wireless and satellite. Now, NBN's looking to get some more money to upgrade the fixed wireless network. What are the challenges there, and what do you think they could do?
Look, I was really pleased when that announcement came out that they're talking about moving areas that off fixed wireless and onto fixed line technologies. This is something we've been advocating for 2 or 3 years now, and my house is a classic example of this, where I'm basically in the town. The rest of the town around me is on fixed line, but my house is zoned as fixed wireless, and so it'd be very easy for them to switch. And so I think by moving a lot of those housing estates that perhaps got caught up in the fixed wireless rollout in the early days onto fixed line, you'll free up considerable amounts of spectrum on the fixed wireless network, which then can go to the rural people who actually need it. So
it's a win-win both sides.
I think it is,
at a consumer level, at least. Yeah.
Absolutely, at a consumer level. And I think it's probably a bit cheeky that they're asking the government for $1 billion to do it, but it's for something that should have been done that way in the first place. So.
Now, there was when they redid the rollout or reconsidered the technologies, some of these houses originally probably would have been fixed line, but then got pushed onto fixed wireless to try and make the rollout easier, yes?
Yeah, it was all about getting premises connected quickly in those early days to make it look, well, basically achieve their numbers. And so, they shouldn't have used that tech in those areas.
So in some ways, these people are just being given back what they would have had in the first place.
That's my thought, Chair.
The other big contentious thing that's stayed with us throughout the NBN's life is, of course, CVC, the bane of many ISPs. I mean, what's the latest story there? Because I know they did a whole bunch of promotions. That the whole faster promotion, I think, was built around giving ISPs more CVC so that could get proportion through to customers. Where does that sit right now?
Look, there's been no change to the CVC construct. There's been a little bit of rebating go on as the various lockdowns have happened in Victoria and New South Wales, but there's an ACCC process running at the moment around CVC, but we're not expecting that to conclude. I was hoping it would conclude sort of around May next year, but it's looking like it'll drag on a lot longer than that. And then hopefully once that does conclude, we'll see CVC disappear for good. That's certainly what basically all of the industry is advocating for. And I think NBN can see a pathway to that, but it's a matter of working out how are they going to deal with slower connections, low income connections and that, and then bridging this gap between what they need as an ARPU to operate and what we need for certainty in terms of bandwidth and our costs.
So getting rid of CVC, it's not so much affecting the end users, but it's affecting the business models of the service providers like yourself and what it costs you to provide that service.
Well, in effect, it will affect the end users because if it continues on the way it is, retail prices will rise. And so it will flow through to end users eventually.
Correct me if I'm wrong, does a CVC-less future mean a more consistent bandwidth future for consumers? If ISPs aren't proportioning it out, like Smarties, if they've just got a dedicated pipe, is that a dedicated pipe that the consumer gets as well?
Yeah, look, it should provide a lot more consistency. I think there'll still be differentiation between providers in that providers have different bandwidths in the rest of their network and different connections to the wider internet. So there's still room to differentiate there. But in terms of the NBN toll road, if you like, it should be nice and wide for all service providers at that point.
Well, I guess we'll have to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. Thanks, Phil, for joining us again on the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me, guys.
So with NBN promising more speed for everyone, but they're at least promising it, delivery is another story. We've also got to consider how those networks have evolved and what that means for consumers and businesses alike. And that's not just a question of physical network infrastructure, but also the software that runs on it. Simon, you're definitely the expert on this stuff amongst us. I think a reasonable number of our listeners would be familiar with the idea of, for example, virtual machines on networks. I mean, you can't trip over an announcement about technology without someone throwing virtualization into the mix. For those that, however, playing catch up at home, can you quickly explain virtualization, virtual machines, what they actually are?
Absolutely. So let's take a trip back to about 2005. And in the bad old days of 2005, you nearly always had to do what's called tightly coupling an application to a server. And the classic example of this was a payroll application. Now, you probably only use a payroll application once or twice a month. But if you don't get that payroll done on the day it absolutely has to be done, all of your workers are screaming. So businesses went out and bought a really fast, powerful server to make sure that they could get their payrolls done. And then it sat idle for the next 13 or 27 business days.
Nice
So what
work if you
happened
can
was,
get it.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Virtualization came along and said, let's not treat this server as a box that can only run that payroll application. Let's treat this box as something that could host several virtual machines. And so what you can do is you can say, okay, on every second Tuesday, I'm going to give 90% of this box's power to running the virtual machine that contains the payroll application. And for the rest of the month, I might give 10% of it to the payroll application for the little bit of tweaking that needs doing, and 50% of it to a database and 40% of it to another application. And each of those applications ran in a virtual machine that looks and feels and behaves exactly like a real server, but it was in fact a virtual machine, a software construct using only a portion of that physical server's capabilities. And virtual machines took over the world of business computing. When you're running anything in the cloud, it's running in a virtual machine.
And people might have seen this on their own computers, yeah? Like if you've got a Mac and you're running Parallels, and then you can run Windows in a window on your Mac, but that window thinks it's a real PC.
Absolutely. And it's the same with, say, Windows subsystem for Linux on Windows. That's a Linux virtual machine chugging away inside Windows. Two pretend computers, one real computer.
Yeah.
Okay, so virtual machines have, as you say, 2005 and earlier than that, in fact. They've been around for a good long while. But now we have containers, and I'll admit, I would classically think of a container as something that I might store biscuits in before I scarf them all down. In the software sense, though, a container is something different, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, virtual machines are great, but the problem with virtual machines is they're virtual machines. They've got an operating system. And as you know, when Windows Update comes along or when other software patches come along, a computer needs lots of care and attention and feeding. The people who kind of noticed that this was a giant PITA were Google, because Google runs a fair few computers. And so Google instead started using containers. Now, containers are isolated little environments in which applications run, but they share a common operating system. So the operating system sits there being an operating system, and when some software needs it, it just says, "Hello, here I am. Give me all the stuff that you give any application that runs on a full machine."
So it's kind of like a virtual machine. They're little like a slice of a virtual machine that can
Yeah.
all run on the one machine.
Yep. But the lovely thing about containers is they can be really small. And what software developers did was they took advantage of this and they said, well, hang on, I'm tired of writing huge monolithic pieces of software that are really hard to maintain. What if I write smaller pieces of software that are easier for me to update and then chain them all together so that you get something that behaves a lot like an application, but it's actually composed of kind of smaller, discrete pieces of functionality? And this is what's called microservices. Now, an awful lot of new applications are written with microservices. Now, without going into the horrible details of what these entail, this whole approach makes it easier for businesses to develop software. So if you see your banking app is suddenly getting a new feature every month, or if you see the software that you're using improving very quickly, or if you see online retailers suddenly adding new features, it's almost certain that they're working in this new way enabled by containers that lets them work on lots of small pieces of connected software instead of one big piece of complex software.
Okay, so that's the upside. It strikes me that if we're building these applications kind of Lego style out of chunks, then are we also building effectively a kind of house of cards? Are there downsides in terms of that security and scalability and speed?
Look, you're certainly creating an awful lot of complexity. But the good news is that what's required to manage that complexity is well known and is well understood. But what enterprise computing has done to start to take some of this stuff on is, again, go back to virtualization. Now, if you look at the way networks have historically been done, they're very reliant on physical devices. You go and pay a six-figure sum to Cisco to get something that's very, very fast at moving packets, and you plug in the wires and you're totally dependent on that box. What's come along now is called software defined networking. And what software defined networking does is it runs that router or that other networking appliance in a server as software. And once you do that, you're not tied to networks as defined by which cable is plugged in where. You can start to create notional and virtual networks. So as you get all those containers, you can create, for example, a network that only comes into being for the few minutes that you stay on a website.
So, Simon, okay, I get why that matters to an enterprise. I get why that matters to a software developer. As an end consumer, why does it matter? What's the impact here on the man in the street staring at an iPhone?
Okay, for the man on the street staring at an iPhone, this matters because 5G is built on all of these technologies. And what these technologies are all about is getting you the functionality that you need as soon as possible and when you need it. So one of the examples that I've often heard used is, let's say that you are on a train that's about to head into a tunnel while you're watching Netflix. What you need is for the quality of that video to come over the network at the quality that is appropriate for the environment you're in. So let's say you're watching in 4K. You don't want that video to stop because you're going into a tunnel. What you want is the network to be clever enough to configure itself on the fly so that it will drop to 1080p or even lower, so that everything keeps going and you keep getting the nice experience of watching Netflix.
Is this, I would have thought, because Netflix will already sort of do that at home depending on how fast your internet is. But that's happening on Netflix's end. I think they're making the decision. It's not the network between you and them that's making the
And
decision.
this is where it gets really cute, because what's happening now is more and more computing power is being pushed out into the network. So what you can do now is you can say, hang on, Adam's train is going into a tunnel. The nearest server to him is bolted onto the 5G or 4G network that's in the tunnel. What if we send a little container or a little virtual machine out into that network at just that point to do the job that Adam needs doing at that moment?
Sounds like a lot of work for one guy watching Netflix on the train. Is this,
Netflix believes
will
in
we
you,
see
Adam.
this?
They
Yeah,
want you to
true.
keep watching.
Yeah. But because I would have still sort of thought that this would be enterprise level stuff. But so is it getting to the point where they would do this for individual sessions and that end users will start to see the benefit of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's certainly under consideration, and it's certainly happening in the gaming world. And
Oh,
one of the
yeah.
things, and one of the things that's making it happen is a change in the kind of chips that run inside data centers. So for years and years and years, data centers have been all Intel inside with a little bit of AMD. But the chips that power most mobile phones use core designs from a British company called ARM.
Hmm.
And the world of business computing has started taking a good hard look at ARM, and now you've got Amazon has built its own ARM chip for servers with 64 cores running at about 2 gigahertz. And they're very much all about finding ways to let people like Netflix, like gaming companies, give you all of that core for as long as you need it to make sure that you have a really great experience on your phone when playing a game, whatever. Oracle, the massive database and software company, has also got its own ARM chip with 128 cores. And so we're entering this world where all the technologies that I tried to describe earlier are now kind of getting into a situation where they will go out to the cloud, get a core from one of these many, many core CPUs, dedicate it to just the thing that you're doing, playing a game, streaming a video, and try to give you this really good, solid experience.
So this sounds like the kind of thing that's going to power the cloud gaming stuff that we keep hearing about. I think Microsoft's doing it. Google were doing it. Is it Stadia? I think I'm
They
not the
haven't
Stadia.
games
yet. They
guy
haven't
here.
Yep.
pulled Stadia here. We've got
Yeah.
GeForce Now doing it.
But this sounds like the kind of technology that's going to make that work or work better than it does now. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when you couple it with the other stuff we're talking about, with containers and so on, this is all technology that makes it easier to develop software, and then easier to deploy it at scale, and then easier to give it the resources it needs to guarantee a solid experience for end users.
That's been a big thing. And actually, online gaming is a really good example at the consumer end for this. That's been a big thing here in Australia, though, because for the longest time, a lot of these services were not made available here. I mean, Sony's got their equivalent, a thing called PlayStation Now. They've never launched it in Australia. And they've always basically said, look, the broadband landscape's just not good enough for it. Microsoft's only relatively recently done the whole Xbox cloud gaming thing here for, I mean, they won't say as much, but for basically the same kind of reason.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, one of the things that isn't well understood about the NBN's design is that when it was looking at its on street furniture, they didn't include space to put extra computers. And I think that's a terrible missed opportunity, because the more compute power you can get out closer to users, the better the experience will be for those users. And we certainly know that the entire business computing industry that I cover is at the moment in a total frenzy, finding ways to put servers next to 5G base stations. It's not like NBN didn't know that this was coming. For whatever reason, they chose not to do it.
So could that have been a nice little money spinner for them to create the space, just like you could put things in your old telephone exchanges, to create the spaces and say to the Microsoft and Googles of the world, here, give us some money and you can put some server power here on this edge of the network.
Yeah, absolutely. Or NBN Co could have run the servers and rented them
Rented
out.
them
Now,
out. Yeah.
yeah, it's bloody complex to do, but this is the model that people are absolutely looking at now. More computing in more places, so that instead of the things that you need to play your game, watch your video, being in a telephone exchange or in a data center somewhere, it's physically closer to you.
Which is going to keep down lag, which is huge for gaming.
Yeah, absolutely.
And presumably you get a bit better network management that way as well, because it's not just gaming, it's everything else that everyone does online. Having that smarter infrastructure closer to you allows you a lot better traffic management, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, under the hood, there's a bunch of really smart people doing really hard things to make it all happen, and increasingly it's automated. But the huge trend is smaller pieces of software running in more places that are closer to you.
Interesting
So,
point.
Simon, that all sounds really interesting from the network perspective of what's outside my house, but how is this going to interact with what's inside my house?
So I think there's enormous potential for this to actually change the way that smart appliances around the home behave. So if you look at a smart TV today, it's basically a really big Android tablet,
Some
with
clunkier than others. Yeah.
yeah, with a weird interface driven by a remote control. And when you install I keep coming back to Netflix, don't I? You install Netflix, you install Binge, you install whatever, and you're actually installing the equivalent of an Android app. There's huge potential for the guts of that TV to change, to take advantage of more of these technologies and to take advantage of the compute power in the TV to do more than just run apps. And every time you bring compute power closer to people, services get better.
But does that require, because currently with the smart TV space, with the slight exception of Samsung, who I know do upgrade kits for some models, so many of these things are baked in. You buy the 2021 model of a TV, you get this set of features, and then the 2022 model will have a different set and a different processor, and obviously the technology gets a bit better. But does that rely on having a more modular approach to what's doing the compute power in your TV? Or is this something that can just be software driven? Is this just something where, like Android, the TV makers could deliver an update to make this happen or to make it talk on the network more intelligently?
Yeah, it's software driven, and I think it's really notable that Samsung, in particular, I think now does 4 years of updates for its Galaxy devices, 4 years of Android updates. If they can stretch to four on a device like a phone that I think has a limited life cycle due to the fact that it gets handled and goes out into the real world all the time, it won't be particularly difficult, I think, to run a longer life cycle on something like a television. And the industry is so committed to the container ecosystem at the moment that I don't think there's much danger that will become obsolete software. And look, even if it does, I've got no idea how many hundreds of millions of televisions a year get shoved out into the world, but it's enough that if there's a common platform, it will remain relevant well beyond the working lifetime of most appliances.
But see, common platform and smart TVs are not two phrases you
Yeah,
tend to
that's
hear
true.
in the same sentence. Tell anybody who's got an LG television running on WebOS or
Yep.
whatever rubbish they used to run on Panasonic.
Well,
I don't
see,
know what
that's
Panasonic
a
runs
Palm
these days.
Pilot rather than an Android TV. strictly speaking.
exactly. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but I think
will
I
we
think
ever
we've
get
kind
that
of
universal thing between TV makers?
look. I think we've moved beyond the point at which a TV maker can differentiate themselves markedly by taking a proprietary decision about the kind of operating system that they'll run on a device. I mean, clearly Android rules this world, and Android is based on Linux, so there are pretty clear signposts that if you want to deliver people an appliance that gives them a good experience for the 8 or 10 years that your telly hopefully lives for, that you got to go with standards, or if not standards, then at least the most common and flexible platform.
See, I guess the other challenge here is my standard advice, and I think Adam would largely agree with me for once, is that by and large, when you're choosing a smart TV, you ignore the smart TV bit. You look at the TV picture
Yep.
and you look at whatever the current state of the art in an add-on smart TV stick, a Google Chromecast TV or an Amazon Fire Stick device, because that's $100 or less bolted onto the side of your TV, easy to update, and so on. But those typically are not high-power devices. They never really have been. Do you think there's an angle there where you could push that a little harder, Simon? Would that work within this model?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you're an Amazon, if you're a Google, you're in a better position to commit to a platform long term. That's actually not a piece of advice I've heard before. So thanks for that, Alex. I think it's actually really insightful, the notion that you can upgrade your telly by bunging in a Fire Stick.
Yeah.
I'm
You
sitting
buy
in
the
front
best
here.
picture quality you can
Yeah,
afford, and then let your devices do the heavy lifting.
yeah. I'm sitting in front of a pretty tired old Sony Bravia here. That's got an Apple TV and a Telstra TV plugged into it, and those set-top boxes get a lot more action than the Sony itself these days.
Well, this is the other challenge, I suppose. As you said, the software can be developed, but whether or not the support is there is kind of critical, because typically a couple of years out from when these things come out, a new streaming service especially comes along. The new TVs will get it. The older ones, there's I mean, historically, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, there's always been these really brutal, hard cutoff lines where they've just said, oh, no, not for anything, 2, 3
Yeah.
years old, something like that.
Or they do that and then they go back on their word. Like LG introduced AirPlay streaming, but no, we're only going back 1 year. We're not going back to the earlier models,
Yeah,
hoping that you
so
would buy a newer one. And then 2 or 3 years later, they went, oh, maybe we could add it to those older TVs. So you could have done it all the time. Yeah, thanks very much.
this is where containers are actually going to make a huge difference, because
Yeah.
containers are have a standard. The standard is called Kubernetes. And that's the software that Google actually uses to run a lot of its internal operations. Kubernetes is now an open standard, and the entire world of business computing agrees that Kubernetes is the way to do things. IBM and Microsoft both like it. Google and Amazon both like it. Everyone likes it. Everyone sees that it's the future. So the allure of making a smart TV capable of running containers is therefore huge, because it does start to give you that longer term viability.
Because it's almost like being able to rip out a physical part of the TV and drop in a new piece. You've got a hole that you can drop anything in there. So whatever new comes along, it's easy and it's a standard way to upgrade what's in that space.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In theory, I mean, you know how it is. This industry takes weird twists and turns, and people
Yeah.
always do try to build their own thing and create a walled garden. And the Apple TV in front of me here is an old one, and it can't run most apps. But in general, the other thing is that manufacturers ultimately want to invest where it counts. And my sense of it is that certainly in smart TVs, they want to invest in, as you say, the best possible picture, because that's what people see. The less that they can invest in writing a software operating system, the better from their point of view, because that's the stuff where it's hard to differentiate yourself.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Simon for joining us for this week's show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Simon, it's been a while since you've been on the show, long time. But you now get the opportunity to face the Vertical Hold 3 questions Doom, which you can answer in any order you'd like. I'll fire all 3 of them at you once.
Okay.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And the big contentious question of the moment, what's the best Australian bird?
You can find me at theregister.com. You can find me on Twitter at @Sharwood or SSHARWOOD, depending on how you want to do it. And the best Australian bird is a tie between the Gouldian finch, which is a magnificently coloured little thing that ViewSonic actually uses as its logo. ViewSonic, the monitor manufacturer. So it's a tie between the Gouldian finch and the sulphur-crested cockatoo, which is just an incredibly magnificent creature.
I have about a
Very highbrow answers there.
Well, it's highbrow and lowbrow.
None of this bin chicken stuff.
No, but the sulphur-crested cockatoo is not a classy bird. I've got about half a dozen of them outside my house at the moment, making a meal of my trees.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this at this point, but I worked through university in pet shops, and one Saturday morning I came into work, and my job, the first 60, 90 minutes of the day involved getting dead fish out of the tanks, and tidying everything up and making sure that everything was fed. And there was this sulphur-crested cockatoo that I swear from the moment I got into the shop was squawking its head off at the loudest imaginable tone. If you've ever heard a cocky go past and your ears have rung, imagine one of those indoors non-stop for 90 minutes. So I didn't know what was wrong. So eventually I rang the boss, and the boss said, "Oh, that's a baby and it needs feeding." Okay, how do you feed a baby cocky? You get a squeezy tomato sauce bottle, and you get some warm water, a couple of Wheat Bix, and some liquid glucose. And you then mix that up into a paste and squeeze that into the baby cocky's mouth. And I mean, you know how Wheat Bix are. It hardens into concrete and it's pretty foul stuff, and it goes everywhere. So, long story short, 20 minutes later, I finally get the bird to shut up after it's had enough of this stuff, and I'm absolutely caked in all of this stuff. And that is why I became a technology journalist.
And Simon, you realise, of course, that what you were feeding it through was in fact a container.
Oh,
beautiful. Brings it home nicely.
I'm not worthy.
We should also give thanks to Phil Britt for his time earlier in the show. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And as always, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. Leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice and help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.